This is going to happen again. And when it does happen again, and when the amplification of that plasma discharge through the ionosphere and straight down to ground, when it's 5 times greater than it was on this event, and when it takes down aircraft, 6, 5, 4 full passenger planes go down during this plasma event, whenever that is at the hyper amplified levels, the world is absolutely going to change. Because it's not going to take a rocket scientist to go, wait, 6 passenger jets came down at the same time over the same location where there was a mass power outage for another country. We are just so lucky there were no aircraft in that vicinity that were at that maximum point. So you're looking at a toroidal field, they call it you're looking at these looping currents in on themselves. One's positive, negative, and they're looping down in on themselves. And this is what basically the petroglyphs were that you're seeing, Ransom, is what you're looking at. Different variances of voltage occurring into those spiraling field-aligned currents that were rolling down. Now, when they get really, really heavy, you can start to see them, as they call them, auroral ropes. This was it was sort of visible, and there's reports coming out that they saw some sort of ethereal waving in the air. I'm trying to describe it the best way it was described. Like there was some translucence, when you look way down a highway and you see it in the middle of the summer and you see that heat rising up. Well, they saw the whole sky doing that. And then after this event was occurring, they started to see the best description was St. Elmo's fire coming off some of not the wires themselves, but the towers. At the very tips, they had this glowing, like finger-like etherealness that sort of was on the borderline of pinkish into white translucence. Okay, that's the reports from people that actually saw this event happen. Now, if there would have been an airliner flying directly over that the most hyper electrified part of that, would they experience a Bermuda Triangle type compasses going awry, systems shutting down in the airplane? Only experienced pilots would be able to navigate that. And with all this DEI garbage gone off and people gotten into positions they shouldn't be in because they don't have the experience they should have, then you really need to wonder. And at what point do they start grounding air traffic completely forever on the planet? Because you got to realize that punch hole event could occur again anywhere. Northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. It is magnetic field lines trying to reestablish themselves through the weakest point of our magnetosphere. And it can come anywhere and at any time. And the scariest thing about it, and Ben Davidson did a great description trying to reel this thing out. And after, listening to a couple of vids, then I went back in. Now, luckily it was during that time. So NASA had still kept, and SOHO, and there was an enormous amount of NOAA data that was still out there to see the magnetic fields and where the Tesla amplification was over these areas. I was able to get a lot of that screen grab during the time. It's gone now. If you hadn't captured that in the 48 hours that they keep data, rolling back in to find those screen grabs going to be a little bit difficult. I'll see if I can bring a couple up here. And it's the sun and the cycles. It's the sun and the cycles. We're in that now. It can no longer be ignored. So I'm just wondering, Ransom, what do you think? Like, the elite know it too. We've just transitioned into it's no longer, we're at the transition phase right now. It is no longer maskable, hideable. And in the elite circles that understand these sun cycles have done, and they're at that point of punch through holes now of doing damage and wiping out electrical grids. Something is about to change with what their planning is. Because we just had an unexplained, well, it's very explainable, but we just had an event that is now going to start to cripple power grids again and again and again, anywhere on the planet, at any unknown time, at anywhere. When we have incredibly low solar activity. We just came off solar maximum, so as we progress into solar minimum, 2028, this is going to happen on a daily or a weekly. What you experience in Spain will be a daily or weekly event coming up in 2028. As we're at the very bottom of this solar minimum, descending into a grand solar minimum on a 400-year cycle, and the possibility of stepping off into a greater cooling on a 2000-year. So if you're going to get I'll even walk you through it. If you're going to get a 400-year low solar activity, or you're going to get a once in 2,000-year low in solar activity, and our magnetic field's in a polar wander phase trying to do the geomagnetic shift at the same time, and it's going to punch through every time it finds the path of least resistance, southern hemisphere, northern hemisphere. That geomagnetic shift that occurred at 42,000 years prior did the exact same thing, punch for punch. It's scary to look at it because that's what it did for 1,000 years. It started in the beginning of trying to punch through, and the field wasn't established enough where it could hold and start to create the new magnetic field, the new north or the new south in these areas, but it probed again and again and again across the planet. And at the height of this, the aurora were visible along the equator. We're in the very beginning of the tearing and the ripping of the magnetic field at low solar winds and solar coronal hole streams. This is when it gets really low and there's almost no activity, where these punch-through events are going to become common. Now, how do you pacify a planet? Or do you keep them distracted? And that's what we're seeing too in real time with this disruption in goods, supplies, the twisting of our economy. And I think I've said enough, Ransom. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I don't know how that's going to work out. Because, from what I've read, there's going to be a point in which there are multiple North Poles, multiple South Poles, before it flips. I read another paper that talked about when the magnetic poles actually flip and the magnetic field collapses, that it'll go at an exponential rate until it flips. So when it collapses, it'll just all happen like rapidly, faster in weeks and then in days, and then it'll happen. So as far as any kind of navigational stuff that's based on magnets, that'll probably be useless during that time period. And as far as the plasma petroglyphs, we actually do not know what the petroglyphs are representing. However, there are some really strange things on the petroglyphs that I've seen myself, and a lot of it is lightning related. So right here where I live, next to me is a place called Three Rivers, and when you go there, you find multiple petroglyphs depicting the mountain, which is 12,000 feet, and a lot of lightning hitting that mountain. So I would think that lightning does hit that mountain all the time in a normal magnetic field, and that's the center point, the highest point. It makes sense that the lightning would be attracted to it. But the problem with that is that the field would be different. So that means the lightning and things like that may be closer down to the ground, and that might be what they were depicting. Now, you said something about orbs a minute ago. A weird thing happened to our family here. One of many, but the most recent thing is that we were sitting outside and my wife says, "Hey, is that the moon behind the clouds?" Well, it wasn't the moon, because the moon was to the east of us coming up over the mountain. So this was in the western sky. And then are you trying to show something? Anyway, this big orb came out of the western sky and it broke through the clouds. And when it broke through the clouds, you could clearly see it. It was a giant orb. And when I say giant, I mean that it was just above cloud level, and it still looked as large or larger than my house from my perspective on the ground. And it had a large beam shooting out of the front of it. Now, my entire family saw that. That's not a big deal because, when you see these things, it becomes just a story. If you have witnesses, it's not that big a deal. They're your friends, they're your family, and people are like, yeah, right. But the weird thing about that, if that same thing would have happened to us in like the 50s or 60s, we would have probably freaked out. We would have obsessed about it. Then we would have, maybe wrote a book, started some, myths of UFO stuff. But in our modern times, we saw it. We were like, wow. We went inside, went about our night as normal. And it really wasn't a big deal. But if you think about that, we saw a giant orb that was bigger than our house at cloud level. It made no noise. It had a beam coming out of it. This was a big yellowish orb with a white center and a beam coming out of it. Ironically, the other people in my family, they told me what they saw, and it was all slightly different. It wasn't what I remember seeing. But if you can imagine that happening all the time, not only to primitive man, but people of today, they're going to freak out. And kind of what I was speaking to about people freaking out, I don't know if it's just the internet or there's just more and more videos of people having mental health crises in the public. But as we've talked about before, intentionally, there are machines that can change the electromagnetic field around. The studies I've seen were in mice and fruit flies. However, I don't see why that would be any different to the human being, where if the magnetic field itself is completely different, like maybe all the way low, you as a human being might be having some kind of effects. I don't know what those effects would be, but maybe a distortion of your view of reality or something like that. No telling how that could pan out visually. But if you actually saw plasma and lightning coming down at lower levels than they ever did, like striking off of any kind of quartzite rock, all of those Neolithic places that we think about with the megalithic stones, I think they would become a lot more active and spectacular. So you might actually see plasma coming out of the rocks and different things, which makes you wonder, how were they hiding in caves if things like that were happening? It seemed like, that might be the only place to be, kind of like the Tesla box, where you have to be inside the metal box not to get electrocuted from all of the plasma that's going around the box. I don't know. Was that too much of a mouthful there? What is going on? All these new scenes popped up. Anyway, there's my little story. Oh, there's another one. Are you trying to add something, David? I don't know. What's going on there? Anyway, what was I going to show you? Oh, yeah. What do you guys think about this thing right here? We're going to have a Chinese style big parade the army's planning. So, like you see over in China where they have these massive military parades. We're doing that. And this is how bizarre the world is. The world's first sperm race seemed to too good to be true. It was fake. It was computer generated, but it got everybody buying into it. Another fake thing. And then here, I want to bring you guys to this right here, if I can. What happens when teachers are replaced with AI? They have a whole school over here along the border that the teachers are artificial intelligence. And they're talking about this can transition children to a 2-hour workday. So no longer will they have to.
There are few things you can count on in a major disaster. Having your water supply cut off is one of them. With the Alexa Pure Emergency Water Bank, you'll have months of drinking water in your home. Everyone else will stand in line waiting to get just a few bottles. It's one of the easiest, most affordable ways to store emergency water, and it takes up hardly any space. The Alexa Pure Emergency Water Bank includes 1 BPA-free liner, comes with a siphon pump for extracting water, fits just about any bathtub, large or small, fills quickly in 30 minutes or less, holds up to 65 gallons of water, and keeps water fresh for up to 16 weeks, holds about 2 months of water for one person. A person can generally survive without water for about 3 days. However, the exact amount of time depends on many factors, including age, activity level, and overall health. Don't gamble with your life and well-being. Being prepared is easier than ever with Civilization Cycle and Alexa Pure.
What is going on here? No longer will they have to spend all day listening to teachers that may or may not be doing a good job. And it seems, at least according to the article, that the kids are doing better than they were before. Are you trying to show us something?
I am. Are you back with me here?
Yeah, it's just waiting on you to pick a source for your whatever you're trying to show us.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to, but I won't pick up my image. I won't pick up my image software there, so I can show you that was the exact same that I pulled off of NOAA data there, and I just don't see it, like it won't let me pull let me cancel that and try it again. For some reason, it's not picking up my movie maker here, or even my image sharing software here. So please allow me 1 second. Maybe
Well,
it'll
if
do
you
a
have
slide.
the,
No, it's going to ask.
I
No, I
was
don't
gonna
have the
say, if
link
you have,
for it because I all I did was screen grab a bunch of stuff yesterday. I was in, trying to figure out how to.
no, I mean, if you
Maybe
have
it'll
the
let me
images,
do it.
I think you can click on slides there and add it to that.
Only if it's PowerPoint or some other type there. So, all right. Well, I want to get to the window. It doesn't. Yeah, there we go. I mean, shoot. Okay. Well, I'm going to cancel that. Anyway, I'm out. Put me back up on the screen, man.
No, you're up
This
there.
is irking
You're
me
on
now.
there. We're all here.
Well, and I heard what you were saying about the glowing crust, right? So, and another thing I would ask in Spain, are you seeing what Ransom was talking about? Are you seeing any like residual energies coming out? Are your animals behaving strangely? Because that punch-through event with plasma reaching ground level, not only was the ultraviolet radiation light, that's what hit the solar panels that caused that surge that went through and overloaded the system. So you had that in itself, but then, so that was in its own electrical source where they were talking about there was a mismatch in the frequency through the lines. That hit and it just sent a blast of power. Now that could be regulated because it was an overcharge of the system coming from the solar panels. So imagine they're rated for an example, 100 watts, but it came in with the UV coming down at 1,000 watts, and those panels just lit up to 100% capacity. And then there was some overage because it actually was riding on the lines, and the plasma was riding on top of anything metallic on the solar panels as well. So you had amplified UV coming down and electrified plasma touching that. So it also grabbed onto the electrical wires and was riding up and down that. That's where you're getting this secondary interference pattern. That's what they were talking about, describing it to you perfectly. Now, I'm wondering what the pets are still feeling. And are you seeing any residual charge coming out of these rocks? Did you touch something where you got an extra jolt of, I wouldn't say electricity, that may be the wrong word to use, but you would, sometimes when you touch earth or rocks, that has a feel like crystals when you touch them. There's a resonance there. You get the paleo electric, like if you piezo electric, excuse me. And if you put those through pressure and rub them, they actually conduct current or spark. I'm wondering how many fires were caused by this, even though the temperatures were low in the 70s. By the way, I went up to Ryan Maui and Big Joe Bastardi's site to take a look, and they ran through all the temperatures occurring at that time. So that whole thing, there was some giant temperature deviation, whatever. We're in April. It only got into the 70s that day. For the high temperatures across all of Spain and Portugal, I encourage you to look at the high temperatures for the day. In the 70s. They were making it was like 180 degrees or something, and it just doesn't make sense. But what did make sense was plasma, electrified plasma coming down. So if that were to hit the ground, there still should be hot spots or hot pockets there. And again, that's where I say you might see some of your supernatural activities around these areas. Because if we go back and why would they put the cathedrals and these worship spots and these stone henges around these same areas? Because after we come through this geomagnetic pole shift and those electrified areas continue, so imagine if that new punch hole area becomes a new magnetic field line connection to the planet that it wasn't before. Well, it would be highly electrified and strange things would start to happen there. Now, we in our modern civilization, would we mark that down and, say, wow, this is a very spiritual place? 12,000 years from now, when it occurs again, or 6,000 years from now, it'll reestablish in a different place. Maybe the prior, like Stonehenge, for example. I know it was rebuilt and restructured in the 1920s and early 1906 and that sort of thing. But some of these more spiritual spots where let's say if we go back to the Aztecs, or we go over to the Chinese where they put the tombs for Emperor Qin, for example, the first emperor of China, Huangdi. That's where the Huang comes from. So they marked out these spots where multiple ley lines had come together, where there were punch-through portals and electromagnetic disturbances in these areas, thinking that that would be a way for the spirit body to transit to the next dimensional realms in an easier fashion. Also, the spiritual significance around these areas. So you have to wonder, what is residual happening right in Spain and in Portugal right now? How about some of these spiritual spots in Spain and Portugal? Were they reinvigorated with the electrical current that would cause them to have some supernatural surrounding them again? These areas weren't put there just because random happenstance. These were very selected locations. We've turned it into just a bunch of woo-woos, stick spinner looking at the sky kind of weirdo people. But in the past, these shamans, these priests, the understanders of cycles and the understanders of energies that could see through dimensions, either through ingesting substances or they were born with that gift. They were the ones who chose these locations based on ceremony or what they had seen, felt. These locations were incredibly special. Now, maybe after 6,000 years, it loses its charge, for a better term. And perhaps this plasma event to the ground hit in a certain area of the crust, but then it could spread through the mineral composition of the crust, perhaps touching the tendrils of the beginnings of these same areas again to re-electrify and reignite them. I was of the volition, after a full geomagnetic pole shift, that mineral veins of our Earth would emanate ethereal colors straight out of the Earth, and they would see that. Perhaps gold veins resonate a gold color. Perhaps some sort of gem crystals resonate purple colors coming out. After that pole shift, and you saw ethereal energies coming out of certain colors just straight out of the Earth, that would be a special spot for you. And the reverence that was given to these areas, that is now we look at woo-woo superstition, we're going to have to start looking at it again, because Spain is a very old place that they had done. How many cathedrals are there? How many ancient stonework sites are there? Castles, forts, all these areas, spiritual pilgrimages. I would imagine there's an entire re-electrified area where they are seeing some bizarre things happening right there, right now. Instead of being spooked by it, just understand what it is. It is a re-electrification of that crust electromagnetically when those spots were sacred and chosen, that they are coming back to life again is the best term to probably use. Coming back from the grave. I mean, you look at how many religions always talk about the death and the rebirth just being a cycle in itself. Would it not be the electrification of our crust and the mineral constituents in our crust be the same? They would dissipate their charge, and that would be the death of the crust, the death of these areas. But could they not be reborn again? That's my question, because something significant just happened over a part of our world here that is steeped in history anyway. So if you're going to add those two parts together and then, do a lot of interviews around the area, I encourage anybody in Spain, please reach out to us. I really want to know on the spiritual realms what's happening. Ransom, I'll leave it there.
Sweet. Check this out. I thought this would be cool because this is about what we're talking about here. So if you look here, this says it's a long exposure of lightning over the volcano in Chile. But if you look at this picture, now imagine it's sped up, these processes sped up. That's the only reason you could see it, because it's a long exposure. But you see that perfect vortex of lightning being formed over time right there. So when they expose it for a long period of time, you see this vortex coming right out of the earth. So this is something kind of like what I think you would be seeing at these quartzite sites, but faster in real time. Or even if you saw a lightning, once in a while, because keep in mind, this is a volcano and there's not necessarily thunderstorms or anything like that happening, but it is connecting to the upper spheres of our planet. And you see this electrical conduit straight into the earth, right in this volcano. Now, I realize this is over time and all of this wasn't happening at once. But if you can imagine this kind of electromagnetism hitting the earth without our magnetic field going on, would you see things like this kind of faster in real time? And then a second point I had over here is that when you look at the map of this blackout, this is not the map, but you look at the map and it is Spain and Portugal only, and it's right on the line, which means that their power grid with a minimal solar interference was out. And they're scrambling right now to say, hey, it wasn't that, it wasn't the renewables. But the question is if their grid was still running off of the nuclear power plants and or coal power plants, would they even have this fluctuation? Because I don't think they would have, because what we're talking about is these massive fields of solar panels going kaputs with just a little bit of burp from the sun. So imagine if you let these crazies take all the way over and implement, these renewable energies all over the planet. How often were you going to be dealing with those renewable systems failing, especially in increased solar radiation or a reduction in the magnetic field? The question's to you. I would think that it would be commonplace and nonstop happening everywhere, kind of like what you were saying. I don't think that what happened there would be anything that you could see right now. However, it may be like that in the future. We may have stronger stuff that you can actually see with your own eyes, interacting with the planets and stuff like that. I mean, not the planets, but the like mountains and stuff.